The front door was already open when I pulled into my mother's driveway. My younger sister Emily stood on the porch with one hand gripping her phone and the other resting impatiently on her hip. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She looked relieved the way someone looks when the person they have been waiting to dump a problem on finally arrives. "You took long enough," she said. I glanced past her into the living room. The curtains were still closed even though it was almost 11 in the morning. That alone told me something was wrong. My mother loved sunlight. Ever since we were children, she had opened every curtain in the house before making coffee. "How bad is it?" I asked. Emily shrugged. "The doctor says she shouldn't be alone anymore." My stomach tightened. And I can't do it. Just like that. 3 words. No apology. No guilt. Just a simple statement delivered as casually as if she were declining an invitation to dinner. Before I could answer, an elderly woman I had never met stepped into the hallway holding a folder. She looked directly at me. "You must be Daniel." I nodded. "I'm 62 now," I said quietly, "and yes, I'm Daniel." She extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Lewis, I'm your mother's social worker." Then she asked the question that would quietly change everything. "Are you the son who's willing to take her home?" I looked past her. My mother was sitting in her favorite chair, wrapped in the same blue blanket she had owned for nearly 15 years. She suddenly looked so much smaller than I remembered. Not weaker. Smaller. As if life had slowly folded her inward. She looked up. Our eyes met. She smiled. "Oh," she whispered, "Danny came." Not Daniel. Danny. The name she hadn't called me in almost 40 years. I smiled back, even though I could already feel tears pressing behind my eyes. "I came. But this story doesn't start here." Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I read as many of your comments as I can, and every story reminds us that sometimes justice doesn't arrive through revenge. Sometimes it arrives through truth. I grew up in a small Ohio town with fewer than 18,000 people. The kind of town where everyone knew who coached Little League, who owned the hardware store, and whose children won scholarships. My father worked 34 years repairing diesel engines. My mother, Carol, taught 2nd grade for 27 years before retiring. They weren't wealthy. Not even close. But they believed education was the ladder out of struggle. At least, that's what I believed they believed. There were only 2 children. Me, and my sister Emily. She was born 4 years after me. Even as kids, we were completely different. I woke up early without being asked. Emily needed 3 reminders to finish brushing her teeth. I loved fixing bicycles, lawn mowers, radios, anything mechanical. Emily loved people. She could make friends standing in line at the grocery store. Teachers adored her. Neighbors remembered her birthday. Cashiers gave her extra cookies. People naturally gravitated toward Emily. I didn't resent that. Honestly, I admired it. What I couldn't understand was why everything seemed easier for her inside our own house. If Emily forgot homework, Mom drove it to school. If I forgot homework, I heard natural consequences teach responsibility. If Emily wanted piano lessons, Mom found the money. When I wanted woodworking classes, we'll have to wait until next year. Next year rarely came. Looking back now, I don't think my mother consciously loved us differently. I think she worried differently. Emily looked fragile. I looked dependable. Dependable children often become invisible. Adults mistake silence for strength. That misunderstanding shaped my entire life. One memory has stayed with me for 50 years. I was 12. Emily was 8. Dad spent 3 weekends building a treehouse behind the garage. Nothing fancy. Just plywood walls. A tiny window. A rope ladder. One Saturday afternoon, We both climbed inside, carrying peanut butter sandwiches. Emily decided she wanted the corner next to the window. I had already put my books there. Mom climbed up the ladder. She looked around. Then she smiled. "Daniels, you're older." I nodded. "You'll understand." She picked up my books, moved them across the room, and gave Emily the window. It wasn't about a window. It never was. It was about hearing those words. "You'll understand." For years, I did. Or at least I tried to. Whenever something favored Emily, I understood. Whenever my birthday present cost less because Emily needed braces, I understood. When Emily's prom dress cost almost $400, while my graduation gift was a used toolbox, I understood. When my college acceptance letter arrived, things changed forever. I had earned admission into Ohio State's engineering program. Not with connections, not through luck. I graduated in the top 3% of my class. A mathematics scholarship covered almost 60% of tuition. I had already lined up a campus maintenance job worth another $8,000 annually. I had done the maths. With careful budgeting, I could graduate owing less than $20,000. I was proud. Dad shook my hand. "I knew you could do it." Mom smiled. But something in her smile felt distracted. 3 months later, Emily announced she wanted to attend a private liberal arts college. Her grades weren't nearly as strong. The tuition was almost 4 times mine. Dad nearly dropped his coffee mug. "We can't afford that." Emily cried. Mom wrapped her arms around her. "We'll figure something out." And somehow, they did. Mom refinanced the house. Dad postponed retirement. Savings disappeared. Emily went. No one ever actually told me not to attend Ohio State. Instead, they asked quieter questions. Would community college make more financial sense? You've always been so practical. You can work while studying. We just need flexibility right now. Flexibility. Another word that always seemed to point in only one direction. Toward me. Within 6 months, I was working 38 hours every week at an auto parts warehouse while attending evening classes. Eventually, I stopped taking classes altogether. Bills came first. Life happened. Dreams waited. Then they quietly expired. Emily graduated debt-free. Bachelor's degree. Study abroad semester in Italy. 2 unpaid internships. Mom and Dad celebrated with a backyard party attended by nearly 60 relatives. I helped grill hamburgers. No one asked whether I regretted leaving school. Maybe they assumed I didn't. Maybe I had become too reliable to ask. At 26, I met Sarah. She worked as a respiratory therapist at the county hospital. She laughed with her whole face. Not just her mouth. On our 3rd date, she admitted she still paid off a 12-year-old Honda. I admitted I rented a 1-bedroom apartment with mismatched furniture. She smiled. Good. I looked confused. She laughed. I've dated men pretending to be successful. I'd rather date someone who's honest. We married 18 months later. The wedding cost just under $9,000. Almost every chair was borrowed from our church. Sarah made centerpieces herself. My coworker played guitar instead of hiring a band. It wasn't glamorous. It was ours. Within 7 years, we had 3 children. Jacob, Megan, Luke. 3 beautiful reasons to keep working. By then, I had climbed from warehouse loader to operations supervisor. Eventually regional logistics manager. It took 19 years. No degree. No shortcuts. Just 60-hour weeks. Night classes in management. Professional certifications. Missed holidays. Missed baseball games. Missed sleep. When people ask whether hard work always pays off, I tell them something honest. Hard work doesn't always make you rich. Sometimes it simply keeps the lights on. There were years Sarah and I both worked overtime just to stay current on the mortgage. One winter our furnace failed 3 days before Christmas. Repair estimate: $3,100. We had $800 in savings. Sarah quietly sold jewelry her grandmother had given her. I found out 2 years later. She never wanted me to know. Meanwhile, Emily's life looked very different. She married a successful real estate attorney. Mom helped with the wedding, paid for flowers, paid for photography, paid for furniture. When Emily became pregnant with twins, Mom retired early to babysit 5 days every week. When Emily and her husband wanted a larger home, Mom and Dad contributed $120,000 toward the down payment after selling the family house. I remember hearing that number. $120,000. I sat silently in my truck for almost 20 minutes. Not because I wanted the money, but because I finally understood something. It had never been about what my parents could afford. It had been about who they believed needed help. And in their eyes, that person had never been me. The strange thing is that resentment doesn't always arrive like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it settles like dust, so slowly that one day you look around and realize everything inside you has been covered by it. I tried not to let that happen. Every Thanksgiving, Sarah would squeeze my hand under the table before we walked into my mother's house. "You don't have to prove anything today," she would whisper. She knew me better than anyone. She knew I would instinctively carry the heavy boxes, wash the dishes, shovel the snow, repair the loose fence, replace the leaking faucet, and quietly disappear into the background while everyone else laughed in the living room. No one asked me to do those things. I simply did them. Because that had become my place in the family. Emily was the guest. I was the helper. It wasn't written anywhere, but everyone understood it. One Christmas, when the twins were about 6 years old, I arrived an hour early because Mom had called. "Danny," she'd said, "could you come before everyone else? The dining room table is too heavy for me to move." Of course. I drove across town after finishing a 10-hour shift. When I arrived, she hugged me quickly and pointed toward the dining room. "I knew you'd come." For the next 45 minutes I moved furniture, hung decorations, carried boxes down from the attic, replaced burned-out light bulbs, and even unclogged the kitchen sink. By the time everyone else arrived, the house looked perfect. Emily walked in wearing a new winter coat. "Oh wow," she said, "everything looks beautiful." Mom smiled proudly. I worked all morning. I stood in the hallway holding the toolbox. She hadn't meant to erase me. I honestly believe she simply forgot I had been there. That hurt more than if she'd done it on purpose. Because intentional unfairness at least acknowledges your existence. Being forgotten feels like disappearing. Sarah noticed. She always noticed. On the drive home, she reached across the console and rested her hand on mine. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She waited. After 28 years of marriage, she knew that "I'm fine" usually meant I wasn't ready to talk yet. About 10 minutes later, I finally spoke. "I don't think Mom even realized." Sarah nodded. "I know. Maybe that's worse." She looked out the windshield for a moment before answering. "Daniel, people don't usually recognize the shoulders they've been leaning on." Those words stayed with me. People don't recognize the shoulders they've been leaning on. Years passed. Dad's health started failing first. His knees gave out before anything else. Decades crawling under diesel engines had left their mark. Then came diabetes. Then heart problems. By 69, the strongest man I'd ever known couldn't walk across the driveway without stopping to catch his breath. Emily visited every Sunday, usually for lunch. She brought desserts. She stayed about 90 minutes. Then she left because one of the kids had soccer, piano, debate club, or some other commitment. I visited every Wednesday evening, every Saturday morning, whenever Mom called because something had broken. The washing machine, the porch light, the garage door, the gutters, the smoke detector. Dad hated asking. "I know you're busy," he'd always begin. "You don't have to explain. I can wait." No, I'd answer, "I'll be there." And I always was. One rainy October afternoon, Dad and I were sitting in the garage while I replaced the brakes on his old pickup. He watched quietly for several minutes. "You still remember?" I laughed. "You taught me." He nodded slowly. Then, almost to himself, he said something I didn't fully understand at the time. "You've carried a lot more than tools." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He stared out at the rain. "Nothing." He changed the subject. That was my father. A man who often felt emotions deeply but spoke them sparingly. 3 months later, he suffered a stroke. It wasn't massive, but it stole his balance and much of his speech. Recovery became a full-time job. Mom insisted on caring for him herself. She refused outside help for almost a year. I made vows, she'd say. "I'll take care of him." She did. She barely slept. She lifted him when she shouldn't have. She skipped her own doctor appointments. She ignored her own aching back. I worried about her constantly. Emily worried too. Just differently. "We should hire someone," she'd suggest. Mom would refuse. Then everyone would move on. Except me. I quietly started coming over before work. 6:30 every morning. I'd help Dad shower, make breakfast, set out medications. Then I'd drive 40 minutes to the warehouse. No one asked me to. It simply needed doing. Dad passed away 2 years later. The funeral was simple. Military honors. A small church. About 120 people. As everyone left the cemetery, I stayed behind for a few extra minutes. I wasn't ready to leave. Mum walked back toward me. She slipped her hand into mine exactly the way she had when I was little. "I don't know how to do this without him. You won't have to do it alone." She looked at me. I know. I meant those words. Completely. After Dad died, I visited even more often. Sometimes just to drink coffee with Mom. Sometimes to mow the lawn. Sometimes because loneliness doesn't announce itself over the phone. You hear it between the words. Emily continued visiting too. Usually on Sundays. She loved Mom. I never doubted that. She simply loved her while trying to protect the life she had built. Her calendar always seemed full. Mine somehow kept making room. About 3 years after Dad's funeral, Mom started forgetting little things. The coffee pot, appointments, neighbors' names. Then came bigger things. Leaving the stove on. Driving to the pharmacy and forgetting why she'd gone. Calling me twice in one evening to ask the same question. The diagnosis arrived quietly. Early stage dementia. The neurologist explained treatment options. Medication. Routine. Supervision. Planning. Mom listened carefully. Then she smiled politely. "I'm still living at home." The doctor nodded. For now. Those 2 words echoed inside me all afternoon. For now. Over the next 18 months, the disease advanced faster than anyone expected. She wandered outside twice. Forgot to eat. Mixed up medications. Once she called me at 2:30 in the morning, because she thought she was 16 years old and late for school. I drove over immediately. She opened the door wearing slippers. Though, she blinked. Danny. She looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I hugged her. You never have to apologize for calling me. She cried into my shoulder for almost 5 minutes. That was the first time I truly realized she was frightened. Not confused. Frightened. She knew pieces of herself were disappearing. And she couldn't stop them. Eventually, the doctors became more direct. She shouldn't live alone anymore. That's when the family meeting happened. Emily hosted it in her beautiful kitchen. The same kitchen Mom and Dad's money had helped pay for years earlier. The countertops gleamed. Fresh flowers sat on the island. Family photographs lined the walls. Everyone looked successful. Comfortable. Safe. There were 6 of us. Emily. Her husband Mark. Sarah. Me. Mom. And the social worker. Margaret laid several folders on the table. We have a few options. Assisted living. In-home nursing. Or a family caregiver. Cost. Insurance. Medical needs. Everything was explained calmly. When she finished, silence settled over the room. Then Margaret asked gently, "Has anyone considered having Mrs. Anderson live with family?" Mom looked down at her hands. Emily avoided eye contact. Mark cleared his throat. Finally, Emily spoke. "I wish we could." Margaret nodded patiently. "But," Emily sighed, "the twins are starting college. Our guest room is my office. We travel. The kids are constantly in and out. My schedule is impossible." Everything she said was technically true. Not one sentence was a lie. Yet somehow none of it answered the real question. Margaret turned toward me. "And you?" I looked at Sarah first. She didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. She simply nodded. That was enough. I faced Margaret. "We'll make rooms." Emily looked relieved. Almost instantly. "Oh, Daniel, are you sure?" I smiled faintly. "I'll figure it out." Those words sounded painfully familiar. "I'll figure it out." I'd been saying them since I was 18 years old. Mom whispered, "I don't want to be a burden." Sarah walked around the table, knelt beside her, took both of Mom's hands. "You'll be family. That's different." Mom started crying. Not loudly. Just quietly enough that everyone else lowered their eyes. Within 2 weeks, we had converted my home office into a bedroom. I moved my desk into the basement. Sarah reorganized the entire first floor so Mom wouldn't need stairs. Jacob installed grab bars in the bathroom. Megan labeled kitchen cabinets with large printed signs. Luke built a small bookshelf beside Mom's bed because she still loved holding books, even when she sometimes forgot where she'd left off. Nobody complained. Not once. The house became smaller. The love inside it somehow became larger. The first few weeks were easier than I expected. Mom still had long stretches of clarity. She woke up before everyone else, made tea, and insisted on folding towels even though Sarah kept telling her she didn't have to. "I've been folding towels for 40 years, Mom would say with a little smile. "You're not taking that away from me." Sarah would laugh. Fair enough. There was something beautiful about watching the 2 of them together. For years I had worried that Sarah quietly resented my family. If she ever did, she never showed it. Instead, she treated my mother with a gentleness that made me fall in love with her all over again. One evening I came home after a 12-hour shift and found the 2 of them sitting at the kitchen table coloring. Not crossword puzzles. Not reading. Coloring. Large flowers. Birds. Simple patterns the neurologist had recommended. Mom looked up proudly. I stayed inside the lines. Sarah grinned. She beat me. Mom leaned closer and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I think I cheated. We all laughed. The next morning began at 4:17. I remember the exact time because my phone lit up on the nightstand. It wasn't a call. It was the small motion sensor we had installed beside Mom's bed. She was awake. I slipped quietly out of bed so I wouldn't wake Sarah. When I opened Mom's bedroom door, she was sitting upright, looking toward the window. It snowed, she whispered. I looked outside. A thin layer of white covered the yard. The first snowfall of the season. It did. She smiled without turning around. Your father loved the first snow. I know. He always said, she paused. It made everything look forgiven. I had forgotten that. Or maybe I'd never heard him say it. Either way, hearing those words felt like receiving a message from someone who had been gone for years. I made her a cup of warm tea. She held it with both hands but only drank a few sips. Then she looked at me. Tired. A little. You work too much. I laughed quietly. So I've been told. She smiled. I used to worry about you. You still do. I suppose mothers never stop. For a brief moment, she sounded exactly like herself. Not the version shaped by illness. The woman who had spent 27 years calming frightened second graders. The woman who always remembered birthdays. The woman who packed lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside. Then, just as suddenly, the clarity slipped away again. She looked around the room. Have I been here long? I took a slow breath. A little while. She nodded as if that answered everything. Hospice nurses often say that people nearing the end sometimes begin reaching backward instead of forward. Mom did. She talked about her childhood. Her own mother's. Her first classroom. The tiny apartment she and Dad rented after they married. Sometimes she spoke to people who weren't in the room. She'd smile at empty corners. Wave softly. Once she thanked her father for fixing a bicycle. He had died more than 40 years earlier. None of it frightened me after a while. It simply felt like watching someone slowly walk toward a place I couldn't yet see. Emily started coming every Friday. No excuses. No rushing. She'd arrive around noon and stay until dinner. Sometimes she brushed Mom's hair. Sometimes she read aloud from old novels. Sometimes she simply sat beside the bed holding her hand. One afternoon, while Sarah and I were preparing lunch, I glanced into the living room. Emily was crying. Not because Mom was sick. Because Mom kept calling her by the name of one of her childhood friends. Over and over. Emily never corrected her. She just answered anyway. When I walked in, she quickly wiped her face. I finally understand. What? She looked at Mom sleeping peacefully. This isn't about whether she remembers me. She smiled sadly. It's about whether I remember her. I nodded. She had learned the lesson years after I had. But she had learned it. Sometimes that's enough. Relatives visited more often once they realized time was becoming short. Cousins, neighbors, former co-workers from Mom's teaching days. One woman brought a stack of handwritten letters from students Mom had taught nearly 30 years earlier. Children she'd encouraged. Children she'd comforted. Children who had grown into adults. One letter read, Mrs. Anderson, you were the first teacher who told me I wasn't bad at math. I became an engineer because you believed in me before I believed in myself. I smiled when I read that. Mom had changed hundreds of lives. Maybe thousands. No wonder it had been so hard for her to accept needing help herself. Teachers spend decades being the strong ones. They rarely know how to become the ones being cared for. 3 nights before she died, something unexpected happened. She asked everyone to leave her room. Everyone except me. Sarah kissed her forehead and quietly stepped outside. Emily followed. The room became still. Mom motioned weakly toward the bedside drawer. Open it. Inside was a small leather notebook. Dark blue. Its edges worn smooth. A ribbon marked one of the pages. I forgot. She whispered. I picked it up. What is it? My journal. I smiled. I didn't know you kept one. Not every day. She struggled to catch her breath. Only when something mattered. I held it gently. What do you want me to do with it? She closed her eyes for several long seconds. Then opened them again. When I'm gone. Her voice was barely audible. Read the last part. Just me. She nodded. Then, she swallowed. I'll share it. With who? The family. I frowned. Why? A faint smile appeared. Because. Another long pause. They deserve. She took one slow breath. The whole story. I wanted to ask what she meant. Instead, she drifted back to sleep. The notebook remained in my hands. It wasn't thick. Maybe 100 pages. Most of them filled. I almost opened it that night. Almost. But something stopped me. She had asked me to wait. So I did. Mom passed away quietly 2 mornings later. Sarah was holding one hand. I was holding the other. Emily stood at the foot of the bed. There were no dramatic final speeches. No movie moments. Just one gentle breath. Then another. Then none. The room stayed silent. No one moved for several seconds. The hospice nurse eventually stepped forward. She listened with her stethoscope. Looked up at us. And nodded. I'm so sorry. Sarah rested her forehead against my shoulder. Emily buried her face in both hands. I leaned over and kissed Mom's forehead one last time. It was strange. The room looked exactly the same. The curtains, the flowers, the photographs, the blanket Sarah had knitted. Everything remained. Yet the entire house had changed. Grief does that. It alters a place without moving a single object. The funeral took place 5 days later. It wasn't large. About 110 people attended. Former students, church friends, neighbors, family. The pastor spoke about kindness, about patience, about a teacher's legacy. Emily gave a beautiful eulogy. Halfway through, her voice broke. She looked toward me. I also need to thank my brother. The church grew quiet. I spent a long time believing love was measured by what people said. She wiped away a tear. My brother taught me that sometimes love is measured by who quietly stays. She couldn't continue for several seconds. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the example he set. I looked down at my hands. Not because I was embarrassed. Because I knew exactly what Mom would have done. She would have told Emily to stop blaming herself. She would have reminded her that families are complicated. That love is imperfect. That people often recognize each other too late. After everyone left the cemetery, I returned home. The house felt impossibly quiet. On Mom's bedside table sat the blue journal. Exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up. Ran my hand across the worn leather cover. Then I remembered her words. Read the last part. I carried it into the living room. Sat in Dad's old recliner. Took one slow breath. And opened to the ribbon that marked the final pages. I had no idea that within the next few minutes, I would discover a truth that would make everything I thought I knew about my family seem incomplete. Not false, just incomplete. My hands were shaking before I read the first sentence. Not because I expected money, or secrets, or anything dramatic. I thought it would be a mother's final goodbye. A few loving words. Maybe advice for her grandchildren. Instead, the first line stopped me cold. If Daniel is reading this, then I waited too long. I stared at the page. Read it again. Then a third time. My mother had always been careful with words. She had spent nearly 3 decades teaching children how much they mattered. She didn't write sentences by accident. I turned the page. There are truths that become heavier every year they remain unspoken. I convinced myself I was protecting everyone. I now believe I was protecting myself. My chest tightened. The next several pages weren't written like a diary. They were written like a confession. Not of a crime. Of regret. She described the day I was born. How my father had cried in the delivery room. How they had promised each other they would never make one child feel less important than the other. Then she wrote something I had never imagined. When Emily was 6, her pediatrician referred us to a child psychologist. I frowned. I had never heard that before. She suffered from severe anxiety, not ordinary childhood fears, real anxiety. She became physically ill before school. She believed every mistake meant people would stop loving her. I kept reading. The psychologist told your father and me something that shaped our family more than we realized. He said Emily needed constant reassurance, while you appeared unusually independent. Independent. There was that word again. We misunderstood independence. We believed it meant you needed less from us. I had to stop reading. Not because I was angry. Because suddenly dozens of memories rearranged themselves inside my mind. The piano lessons. The homework. The window in the treehouse. College. Every decision. Not explained. But seen through a different lens. I turned another page. Your father questioned me many times. That sentence surprised me. He worried we were asking too much of you. I always answered the same way. Then she quoted herself. Daniel understands. Those 3 words. The same ones I'd heard all my life. Except now they looked different. Not like favoritism. Like an excuse. An excuse repeated so often that it became the foundation of our family. I kept reading. The terrible irony is that the more responsible you became, the more responsibility we placed upon you. Tears blurred the ink. Every time you carried something without complaint, I convinced myself it wasn't heavy. I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt more than anything else. Because it was true. People rarely measure another person's burden. They measure how quietly it's carried. The journal continued. Mom wrote about my college acceptance. She remembered the scholarship. The campus job. Everything. Then came a paragraph that made me sit perfectly still. Your father wanted to borrow against his pension, so both of you could attend the schools you chose. I blinked. Borrow against his pension. He had never mentioned that. I said no. I was afraid of losing our retirement. I was afraid of failing Emily. I believed you would succeed no matter what happened. Another long pause. I was wrong. Not wrong because I hadn't succeeded. Wrong because she had made the choice for me. Without asking me what it cost. She wrote about our wedding. About watching Sarah sew decorations late into the night. I should have helped more. About our first house. I should have celebrated you the way I celebrated Emily. About every Christmas. Every birthday. Every family gathering. The entries became shorter. More emotional. Daniel never asked why. He never demanded fairness. I mistook grace for the absence of pain. That sentence broke something inside me. Because she finally understood. Too late. But she understood. I reached the final pages. The handwriting had become shakier, more uneven. The dementia had already begun when she wrote them. Some words leaned across the lines. Others faded. Yet the message remained perfectly clear. If Emily is hearing this. She had written as if someone would read the words aloud. My sweet girl. I spent so many years protecting your fears that I accidentally neglected your brother's heart. I swallowed hard. You did not ask me to do that. That sentence mattered. She wasn't blaming Emily. Not once. Please do not spend the rest of your life carrying guilt that belongs to me. Then, instead, spend it seeing your brother the way I should have seen him sooner. I turned one final page. There was a folded envelope tucked into the back cover. On the front, in careful handwriting, were only 4 words. For the whole family. I sat there for nearly an hour before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Shorter than the journal. More direct. She ended it with one sentence that left me quietly crying in my father's old chair. Families are not destroyed by one terrible decision. They are changed by thousands of small assumptions made over many years. I assumed Daniel would always understand. I never asked whether he was lonely. I finally understood what she had meant. It wasn't one event. It wasn't college. Or the house. Or the grandchildren. Or the holidays. It had been a system. A pattern repeated so often that none of us questioned it anymore. Not even me. The following Sunday, I called Emily. I think it's time. She knew exactly what I meant. That evening, our family gathered in my living room. No lawyers. No arguments. No discussion about inheritance. Just family. I placed Mom's journal on the coffee table. Looked around the room. Then quietly began to read. The room stayed silent after the first page. Not the awkward kind of silence. The kind that happens when everyone realizes they're hearing something they can't interrupt. Sarah sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Emily sat across from me with Mark beside her. Jacob, Megan, and Luke occupied the couch. The twins had driven in that afternoon. A few of my cousins came. Even Aunt Linda, who had known my mother since high school, quietly slipped into a chair near the window. No one reached for coffee. No one checked a phone. I read every word exactly as Mom had written it. When I reached the part about Emily's childhood anxiety, Emily covered her mouth. I didn't know, she whispered. Mark looked at her. You never told me. She slowly shook her head. I don't remember most of it. Then I continued reading. When I reached the passage about Dad wanting to borrow against his pension so both of us could attend college, everyone looked stunned. My cousin Robert finally spoke. Your uncle never mentioned that. He didn't mention it to me either, I answered. Emily lowered her head. I thought, she began. Then stopped. What? I thought Mom and Dad had always agreed. So did I. For the first time in decades, neither of us was defending our own memories. We were discovering them together. As I read the pages about birthdays, Christmases, and all the little moments Mom wished she could relive, I noticed something remarkable. Nobody tried to explain her choices. Nobody argued. Nobody said she did her best. Of course she had. We all knew that. The journal wasn't asking us to judge her. It was asking us to understand the cost of assumptions. When I reached the final letter, my voice grew quieter. Families are changed by thousands of small assumptions. Emily started crying before I reached the end of the sentence. Not dramatic sobbing. Just the exhausted tears of someone finally seeing a picture that had been incomplete her entire life. When I finished, I closed the journal. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, Jacob broke the silence. Grandma wasn't asking us to pick sides. I looked at him. No, she was asking us to stop repeating the pattern. I smiled. I think that's exactly what she meant. Emily stood. For a second, I thought she was leaving. Instead, she walked across the room and stopped in front of me. "I'm 58 years old," she said quietly. "And I don't think I've ever really thanked you." "You don't have to. Please." She knelt beside my chair. Just as Sarah had knelt beside Mom during that family meeting months earlier. "I've spent most of my life believing you were simply stronger." She laughed sadly. "I never realized strength has a price." She reached for my hand. "I can't give you back college." I smiled. "No, I can't give you back the years. No, I can't change what Mom and Dad decided. No." Her voice trembled. "But if you'll let me." She squeezed my hand. "I'd like to spend whatever years we have left being a better sister." There are moments when forgiveness feels like a mountain. This wasn't one of them. It felt surprisingly small. Not because the past didn't matter. Because I had already spent years putting it down. "I'd like that." She leaned forward and hugged me. For a long time. Long enough that neither of us cared who was watching. Across the room, Sarah quietly wiped her eyes. Mark put an arm around his wife. The twins looked at one another as if they were seeing their own family history differently. No one applauded. No one gave a speech. Life isn't like that. People simply breathed a little easier. The months that followed weren't perfect. Healing rarely is. Emily began calling every Wednesday instead of only Sundays. Sometimes just to ask how my day had gone. Sometimes to tell me about nothing important at all. She invited Sarah and me over for dinner without making it a holiday. She came to Luke's softball games. She mailed birthday cards she actually wrote herself instead of signing both her name and Mark's in the corner. Little things. The same way the old pattern had been built. One small choice at a time. One afternoon, about 6 months later, she arrived at my house carrying a cardboard box. I found these in Mom's attic. Inside were dozens of old photographs. School report cards. Drawings. Letters. Even the little wooden birdhouse I'd built in 7th grade. "I thought Mom threw this away," I said. Emily smiled through misty eyes. "So did I." Tucked beneath the birdhouse was a yellow envelope. Dad's handwriting. "Daniel." Inside was a single sheet of paper. No date. No explanation. Just a note. "Son, I know there are days when it seems like we ask more from you than is fair. The truth is, I have depended on you too much. Not because I loved you more. Because I believed you could carry it. That's my mistake. A father should never confuse capability with obligation. If I don't find the courage to say this out loud someday, I hope you read it here. I have always been proud of the man you became. Love, Dad." I stared at the page for several minutes. Emily whispered, "He never gave it to you." "No, I wonder why." I folded the letter carefully. "I think he kept waiting for the right time." She nodded sadly. "Sometimes we all do." Almost a year after Mom passed away, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Margaret. "Daniel." "Hi. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I wanted to ask you something." "Sure." "Our caregiver support program is holding its annual recognition dinner." I smiled politely. "That's nice. We'd like to honor you." I laughed. "I think you have the wrong person." "No." Her voice was warm but firm. "We have exactly the right person. I didn't do anything extraordinary. You welcomed your mother into your home for 2 years. A lot of people would have." Margaret paused. "I visit hundreds of families." "I know. And I can tell you with complete honesty." She took a slow breath. Not enough do. The ceremony was held in a modest community centre. Nothing fancy. About 80 people attended. Families, nurses, social workers, volunteers. When my name was called, I almost didn't stand. Recognition had never been comfortable for me. Margaret smiled as I walked to the front. She didn't list my job title, smiled as I walked. She didn't mention a war.